Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Rick and Morty, Season 3, Episode 6. This one's called Rest and Ricklaxation. And it kicks off things with a Rick and Morty adventure like we always have. Rick and Morty, adventures forever! Yeah. And I love the way this adventure is framed. It's the standard kind of sci-fi bonker stuff that we would typically see in an episode of Rick and Morty. But the context of this is that these are two people who are just worn down to the bone. There's almost no energy left, and they go on this 6-day crazy excursion, which was originally supposed to only take 20 minutes. And you see them at the end of this. They show the whole, finale and them getting their medals and everything. And they get back to Rick's spaceship. And they're just dead tired. And I have kids. And I can relate to this kind of dead tired. After about 5 or 6 hours with my kids, if it's just me, sometimes I'm like, I'm ready to just not right now, guys. Can we just shut our eyes for a minute and just, yeah, good. That's fine that your brother's killing you. It's cool. I'm just gonna lay here on this chair. So that's what Rick and Morty are going through times 11, and they've had it. And Rick even admits to Morty, like, okay, fine, yes, this was maybe too much. Let's go take the chill pill. And they go to an intergalactic day spa that has a bunch of weird concept-y type stuff. They get swallowed by a thing. And then they get into this detoxification chamber for their souls. And we get the premise of this show, which is that the toxic, I'm doing air quotes, but my little animated character here can't do air quotes, parts of their personality are removed. And I love the mechanic here, the idea that this thing doesn't have an objective understanding of what is toxic and what is not. It takes out the parts of you that you don't like, that you would rather not have. And toxic Rick and Morty are left in this sort of dump bin for all the pieces of people's personalities that they didn't want. And regular Rick and not regular, that's not correct at all. It's difficult to describe this Rick and Morty. I mean, we saw Rick kind of have all his combative thoughts removed in the previous episode where he was with Jerry, and he just kind of turns into a drooly Jerry guy. Here, he's still Rick in some form or another, but he's not the same. And Morty's not the same either. Morty turns into a real douchebag. Listening to NPR, eating kale, talking about how empowered you should be. I mean, I listen to NPR, guys. I enjoy NPR, but I'm just saying, maybe back off on 2 or 3 of those factors, Morty. No. Back it up. And he goes off on his thing. Rick is just he's still a little bit nihilistic, but he's lost his edge, if that's a good way to put it. The version of Rick that ends up in the toxic dump is obviously very self-centered, very antagonistic towards Morty, but also really cares about Morty. And the idea that part of Rick is the one that he feels like is a weakness, is a toxin to him, that he wishes that he could get rid of. Not that new Rick completely doesn't care, but the sort of the guy who would say grandpa's here, that's the one who ends up in the toxic dump, because that's the one that Rick sees as problematic. And the Morty that ends up in the toxic dump is this ball of neuroses and self-doubt and complete lack of self-confidence. But also, in the course of Morty getting rid of all that stuff, one of the things he gets rid of is his conscience. And I was reading the message boards, specifically the post-episode discussion on Reddit before I got on and recorded this, and I saw a lot of people talking about, and I think this is a very good read, about what it is that Morty values now that he's been hanging out with Rick, and the fact that after being with Rick for so long, he sees a conscience as a liability. That he wishes that that was a thing that he did not have to deal with. And he gets to not deal with it. Of course, because this is a TV show, they're not gonna stay like that. So toxic Rick and Morty get a message out to regular Rick. Regular Rick decides that he needs to put them back in, which says something about the morals of regular Rick, right? That this guy recognizes this is a bad thing. Even if these are the worst parts of my personality, these are sentient living individuals. And I can't just kill them. Like they exist on their own. They need to be a part of me. I did it wrong. I screwed it up. And it's good to know that Rick at least sees his ability to admit his mistakes as a positive. So that's nice. He tries to put things back. Toxic Rick tries to trick him. Fortunately, Morty is, douchebag NPR Morty is hitting on the ladies at the bar and brings... I love this character. I forget what her name is, but the girl who he hits on at the bar who's just like, yeah, there's a 14-year-old laying down some moves. I've been through some stuff. Fine, yeah, I'll go to your grandpa's garage and look at the weird tube that you have and maybe consider doing some stuff with you. Yeah. That character fascinated me. She gets into the weird switcho chamber and gets put into the toxic world, and we get a really cool conceptual fight between the two Ricks, right? Specifically, my favorite part of this was that Rick has multiple guns hidden in his house, which the function is when you shoot somebody with one of these guns, it kills them and makes another Rick come out. That's a weird concept, right, guys? Like, that just seems kind of bonkers. I don't... That's off to me. That's weird. I love it, but it's so weird. And to see it happen twice, and it must be DNA activated too, because obviously Cool Rick gets Cool Rick back and Toxic Rick gets Toxic Rick back out of the body he shoots. So there's some kind of trigger there. That's not the point of the episode, obviously, but I love that little bit. Toxic Rick takes Toxic Morty and tries to convert the whole world into toxin stuff, which does work. And there's some great little bits. There's some more kids killing people in this episode. Talk about dark, guys. But although I will say that my favorite little throwaway gag there was I forget what the exact shops were, but it was like a hamburger shop next to a salad shop. And when people got grossified, the people came out of the salad shop and went to the hamburger place, and the lady came out of the hamburger place and dived into the dumpster. I know that, I mean, it's just such an obvious joke, but I loved it. I thought it was great. So they get to the big showdown on the big tower that evil Rick and Morty, or toxic Rick and Morty, built. And we get that reveal, which I've already mentioned in the past, that the toxic version of Rick, the version he does not want to be, is the one that cares about Morty. And he is able to, use that against himself and get himself back together. But non-toxic Morty doesn't want anything to do with it. And we see him run off. And I love that he's developed enough in the series, just intelligence-wise, that he's able to go off the grid from where Rick is without, living like some kind of hermit. Like, he's on Wall Street somewhere, making calls and closing deals and getting crazy with the stock prices, and Rick can't find him. And I think that's great, and he's living his, I want to say, his best life, the life that he thinks that he wants, the life where he's not afraid, the life where he has a hot girlfriend, the life where he's the moral authority for everybody, which I think that's the biggest problem for this Morty, right? That he thinks that he can tell everybody that he has all the right answers. Some of the answers he has are right answers, but the fact that he knows that makes him kind of a douchebag. The fact that he's so conceited about how right he is what I think is the biggest turnoff for him. And yet, for some reason, he allows Rick eventually and his crush from, I forget her name, but from the beginning of the episode and obviously from all the way through the series, this girl that he has a massive crush on from high school, like, they come and rescue him. There's this whole implied off-screen adventures of Rick and Morty's girlfriend that isn't his girlfriend thing that we didn't get to see, but she apparently knows about his whole deal and all the stuff that Rick can do and cares enough about Morty to keep, like, telling Rick that they need to help him, and Rick cared enough about Morty that he was calling her up and be like, we gotta find Morty. Again, to refer to the comment boards, there's a lot of theories going around about what Morty's deal is here. Does he, as a non-toxic type person, just eventually realize that this life isn't for him and he needs those toxic parts of himself? Or is this a calculation, something that he's planned for? He's had months to plan for this, we know, and something that he has ulterior motives in finally letting Rick come back and think that he's back to normal. I don't know. I know that there's a lot of people looking for evil Morty to pop out here, and that's not a crazy idea by any stretch of the imagination. We've seen Morty doing arguably evil things, right? He's going around more towards what I would say are the more toxic versions of Rick's worldview, and he's a character that's kind of in flux right now, that he could turn into a lot of things. I don't think Morty is evil yet, but I do think that that's an interesting direction. My initial reaction to this show was a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? It felt obvious. It felt a little bit too simplistic that, okay, we're doing the Jekyll and Hyde thing. We're just gonna say what these characters' hang-ups are. We're just gonna like put it out in the text, not like the subtext, not like through actions that they do that we can interpret. We're just going to explicitly point out exactly how they feel about the elements of their psyche and what those things mean to them. That felt a little bit heavy-handed to me. It's not like that this is a terrible episode and I'm going to stop watching Rick and Morty. I don't like it. But that element, the show so far has been much more subtle than that. And here we have something that is arguably just the least subtle that we've ever had the show be about these characters, right? I mean, the show is unsubtle about many things, but about how these characters are built. And I like, that we've had the kinds of conversations about these people's inner lives, right? Their psychological hangups and their interpersonal problems, and that you've turned this intergalactic weirdo comedy sci-fi concept into a family drama on some level. This felt like just really whacking that nail on the head, though. For lack of a better explanation, it felt like most recent season of Game of Thrones writing. Like, but what if Rick and Morty's most darkest things were taken out of them and they were a separate person? Oh! Brought to you by Benoist and whatever the other guy's name is from Game of Thrones. Yeah. So that's my, I guess, criticism. I like what it tells us about these characters, but I almost didn't want to be told. I didn't want to know all the specifics. I like that we can think about these things and we can debate them and say, well, from my perspective, this is true. And because, and then, you can come back and say, well, what about when this person did this, and really analyze? Because not only do we see other people through this kind of filter every day where we have to figure out what their motivations are without being on the inside of their heads? Even in the insides of our own heads, we don't have a real clear idea of who we are. There are layers of our own consciousness that we may not be able to perfectly unpack. And I like the subtlety more than the... What's the word I'm looking for? Just the obvious. I think they're probably going to go somewhere interesting with this. I think this is the kind of show that's going to come back and have consequences later. But as a show on its own, this sort of takeoff of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was not adequate for me as a concept. I wanted more nuance, and it was, I thought, like I said, a little bit hitting the nail on the head there, guys. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. If you'd like to share them down in the comments below, I read all those and try to reply to every one of them. And next week, there is no next week. Rick and Morty, not here next week because of Labor Day weekend, baby. Yeah. Let's all go and grill some stuff. Get those good carcinogens baked into that meat, y'all. And I will see you guys in 2 weeks with another episode of the Rick and Morty recap. Take care, guys.